information about ocean issues and what we can do to help. Before we begin, I would love to start with a land acknowledgement. So land acknowledgements are done here in Canada as a way to help with reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples. So I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining on Treaty 6 territory. This is a traditional meeting ground, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We meet today on a virtual platform, but I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands that all of us call home. Our topic today is not specifically focused on the land in which we stand, but it's highlighting the interconnectedness of all of our homes through the ocean. So taking a moment to reflect on our relationship with the land is really just our first step in mending our relationship with the ocean as it connects us across the planet. So again, we do have two wonderful ladies here who are going to help us with this, but if we just take a minute before we begin to really think about our connection to the land that we're on, I think that's a really great step to what we're going to be covering today. We have a ton of amazing schools joining us this morning. So we still have a few of you guys that are filtering in. So as you join, just a little reminder, it would be great if you guys could include in your name the location that you're joining us from, because if we take a look at our list here, we have quite an extensive list of schools that are joining us. So it would be great to see not only your school name, but where you're joining us from. So we have, of course, a lot of homeschools across Canada that are joining us. We've got our friends in Portugal and Delhi this morning, Babylon, we've got Trinidad, our friends from Cold Lake, Winnipeg, of course, Toronto. We have a few schools joining us from Toronto, a couple schools from here in Edmonton where I'm located. And I do see in our group here a few of our friends from the Philippines, so welcome to you as well. And then, of course, we've got a few from Nigeria, Russia, and Kenya. So welcome to all of these schools. I'm hoping I got us all on the list here. If I didn't, feel free to pop your name in the chat. So our sisters Sanitation High School from Algeria, just pop their name in the chat. Good morning to you guys. If anybody else would like to say a good morning, feel free to pop it in the chat and say good morning to everybody. We're very excited to have every single one of you here, so we want to make sure that you're acknowledged. And that's also a good reminder, while our presentation is running, if anybody has any questions or any comments that they would like to make, the chat is the best place to do that. So while Daphne is running her presentation, if you have a burning question that you just can't wait to ask, for sure, put that in the chat. So the best way to get your questions answered is to type them in the chat, and we'll get to them when we have time to get to them. If you would like to unmute and ask your question out loud, there is the option to do the raise hand emoji. So there's a reaction in the bottom of your screen. You can click on that and raise your hand, and we'll get to you when we can so that you can ask your questions out loud. So the best way to make these events really interactive and work really well is to ask lots of questions. So it's a really great idea to try to at least once or twice during the presentation, give us a really good questions that we can really see what these ladies know about. Okay, so without further ado, I would love to introduce our guest speakers. So we have two guest speakers with us today. We have Daphne Austin from OceanWise and Sydney Howlett from Green Learning. So I'm going to introduce both of them before I throw it over to Daphne to start our presentation. So Daphne Austin, she is the online specialist at OceanWise. Daphne helps others connect to the ocean through her background in conservation education and a Bachelor of Science in combined oceanography and biology. An expert in creating connections through online platforms, she has also connected landlocked students across Canada to their shorelines visiting communities as part of the OceanWise's Aquavan 150 tour. She is passionate about inspiring others to make positive choices for our ocean. So welcome, Daphne. We are very excited to hear what you have to say. Thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me today. I'm super excited to join you all and to explore the ocean and water and how important it is, but also how important it is for us to think about how we can help protect that water that we all need. Awesome. So I would love to share my screen now.
Would you mind? I'll introduce Sydney first too, just so that I don't have to jump back and forth between our screens, and then we'll pass it over to you. Okay, so let's go ahead and introduce our second speaker. So Sydney Howlett. She is on a mission to empower youth to take climate action through education. Trained as a teacher, she has a diverse professional background, leading outreach to post-secondary students, teaching elementary French immersion, and establishing environmental art programs in the nonprofit sector. As the engagement manager at Green Learning, Sydney leads the growth and impact of programs and supports educators in implementing environmental education in their classroom. So welcome as well to you. Sydney, would you like to say a few words before we throw it over to Daphne?
Yeah, I'm just really excited to be here, and so great that you're all joining us from such a diverse geographical locations. And I'll join in after Daphne, and we'll talk a little bit more about what solutions we have to address the problems of plastic waste in the ocean. So really looking forward to it, but I'll pass it back over to Daphne to get us.
Hey, awesome. Sounds great. So yeah, Daphne, over to you. You can go ahead and share your screen and we can get going.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to have us all have a bit of a chat, explore plastics, and the impact that it has on the planet and the water that we have. But I am with OceanWise, as Rebecca mentioned, and we are headquartered in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. So that is that little star right there. And as you can see, I've pulled a map from Whose Land, which is a website that kind of shows some of the where some of the traditional lands and territories are for many peoples across Canada, so Indigenous peoples. And I am in Vancouver, which is actually on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Peoples. And I'm really grateful that I get to connect with you all today from their lands and think about how we can protect the land, water, and sky as they have since time immemorial. But I'd like to introduce you to OceanWise as well. So we have just rebranded OceanWise, so maybe you are more familiar with our old logo. This is going to be our new one that you'll see throughout the presentation today. But you know what? We're talking about water today. It's World Water Day. And if we take a look at this beautiful planet that we all live on, it is largely water. It's about 71% water, and about 70% of that is the ocean. So that is a ton of the water that we have. And this water is super important for us. You know, I'm sure you've had a glass of water today. Your body is mostly water. It's super important for all of us. And it gives us, the ocean itself is going to give us other things as well, like oxygen, food, livelihood, and just beauty to enjoy. But water travels around the planet, right? We know the water cycle, how it's going to rain or snow or hail, many other things down from the sky, and that's going to transfer down mountains and hills, through lakes and streams and rivers, all the way to eventually the ocean. So no matter where you live, we are all connected through water. And the planet has been for all of time, really. Water is super, super important for life. And we see lots of life in the ocean, all the way from temperate waters, such as where I am in Vancouver today, all the way to tropical areas around maybe the Philippines. So there's lots of cool ecosystems that are supported by the ocean and water as well. But we are all connected together. Even if you are across the world from where I am today, we're connected by the ocean. We like to think of it as five, but it truly is just one. There's no walls, there's no barriers. All that water can move around. And it has lots of currents that help it do that. Moving water using the changes in temperature and salinity to help it travel around. And that can be really great for us to even out temperatures around the world and to have water mix from country to country. But it also brings with it some challenges and some challenges to that movement. So real quick, throw in the chat, what is a threat that you think the ocean or water is facing? What are some ideas?
And I know while they're thinking there, we did have a couple of them share their ideas just at the top of the presentation here. So I know our friends at Austin O'Brien said their biggest concern is ocean biodiversity. And we also have our friends from Chestermere saying that they're worried about melting glaciers and rising sea levels.
Yeah, so there's lots of different concerns. Those are great ones. And you know what? There's a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't hope. There is definitely still hope. And especially in the terms of biodiversity, there's lots of studies that have been coming out in the past few years talking about how if we give the ocean the opportunity to recover, it can. So all we need to do is give it the opportunity. So we are going to talk about some challenges today, but I want to focus on some of those positives too. Some of the ones that we at OceanWise are looking into for threats is we've actually picked 3 to focus on. There's many. And those are overfishing, climate change, and ocean pollution. But really, at the center of it all is all of us, right? All of these threats are connected, and we are connected to all of them in ways that we can help improve. We are going to focus a bit on plastics today as a form of pollution. And just raise a hand or mention in the chat, have you seen plastic? I'm sure we've all seen plastic, but have you seen it as a form of pollution before? Where did you see it? I know I've seen it in many different places and lots of different countries that I visited as well. So it's sometimes we have folks that might say, well, I don't see that where I live. But maybe it's other people. Well, it's not. It's all of us, right? No matter where you live, your plastic can actually travel to other areas. So I'm sure that we've all seen plastic on the ground, maybe at a beach, maybe in a park. It's a big problem. But today we're going to kind of go over why is water important? We kind of went over that a bit. It's important for survival. How does plastic impact the ocean? And how can we turn off the plastic tap? So if we have all this plastic constantly coming into the ocean, how do we turn that off? So first I want to kind of get into what is this plastic problem that we talk about? And I have a question for you. So you can put your answers or your guesses in the chat. But the question is, half the plastic in the world was created in the last how many years? So 50 years, 25 years, 15 years, or 10 years. So in how many years has half the plastic ever created been created? What do we think? Let us know.
Am I allowed to guess as well? Do I get to throw it in the chat?
Go for it.
This is a difficult question. As well, guys, if you want to throw your answers in the chat, A, B, C, or D, or if anybody's brave enough to try to answer, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. You guys can give your class's guess as well. If you just take a quick second and pop your answers into the chat, we can kind of see where we're all at. I need to think about this for a second and then I can make a guess as well.
I find this one a tricky one too. If we think about it, plastic has been around for quite a while, but it wasn't super popular for production until about the 1950s. So it's been quite a while, but you know what? It's actually been in just the last 15 years that we've had about half the plastic created. So that means that we kind of slowly increased how much we were using. It's a bit of an exponential curve. We're kind of producing tons and tons and tons and increasing that a lot in the last couple years even. And that can be actually a connection to climate change in that when we create plastic, when we recycle plastic, that can contribute to greenhouse gas emissions and those carbon emissions. So in 2019, we had about 0.86 gigatons of carbon emitted. That doesn't mean a lot, but that's more than twice the emissions from the state of California. And there's a lot of people that live there. There's a lot of production. So that's quite a bit. What scientists think might happen is that by 2050, that's going to get a lot bigger to 2.8. That doesn't mean that it has to get there. That's just what might happen if we're on our consistent path of plastic use. But what if we reduce our impacts? What if we reduce our plastic use? We could actually minimize that a ton. There's still lots that can happen in the next 30 years. But we use plastic every day. I want you to take a look around yourself. Do you see anything that is made of plastic? Yeah. I mean, my hair tie was plastic. Yeah, calculator, definitely. Part of my watch is plastic. Parts of my computer and my lights and my microphone are plastic. That's right, Austin O'Brien. Pretty much everything. So many items these days are made of plastic. It's super cheap to make, it's flexible, it's durable, but the durability can be a problem as well. It can be really amazing in that it can get, say, food to people that live far away from where it's produced really safely. You can keep that food fresh for a longer period of time. But not everyone needs to have that food in plastic. I feel very lucky and privileged that I live in Vancouver, where we have lots of fresh produce and fresh dairy and things nearby. So maybe I have the privilege and the opportunity to choose not to use as many items wrapped in single-use plastics. So there are good and bads to plastic. And as we go through the next little bit, and you're welcome to share right now, what do you think is a bad part of plastic? And what do you think is a good part of plastic? So it's a gray area. We need it, but do we need all of it? It's really the big question. What do we think, everyone? You can share in the chat or you're welcome to unmute.
Austin O'Brien did say to us as well that they said everything is made of plastic. So even just that could be a good and a bad thing about plastic.
Definitely. Yeah, so many things. And that's really handy, but it also means maybe not all of that needs to be made of plastic, or maybe it doesn't need to be wrapped in plastic. I mean, a lot of those that we could reduce are those single-use plastics. Now, we might need single-use plastics for things to be sterile in the medicine, for doctors, for us to stay healthy. But there are certain things like plastic bags and water bottles that we might be able to reduce. I mean, 50% of plastic produced is designed for immediate disposal. Those are those single-use plastics. It's a lot of plastic we could reduce. In just Canada, we use about 15 billion plastic bags every year. And many areas in Canada are trying to ban single-use plastic bags. But you know what? There's lots of other things we can work on too. Because these pieces, if they do travel from inland down rivers and streams and lakes to the ocean, as they travel, they break down into smaller and smaller pieces. So that large plastic water bottle is no longer that one piece. It's actually thousands of tiny little pieces that we find. And we call these microplastics. Let us know in the chat if you've heard that word before. Now, we at OceanWise have some pretty cool researchers that actually take a look at these microplastics to figure out what's going on. And one of the places that they've actually found these fibers coming from is actually even our clothing.
The Plastics Lab is a unit of OceanWise that looks for science-based solutions to the problem of microplastics in our oceans. There has been some research and characterization worldwide that has pointed to a number of different streams. One of the ones that we have studied in our lab has been the path of synthetic polymer microfibers that make their way from consumer textile products. We get them in our washing machines. They shed fibers when they're in the washing machine. These fibers through the water make their way to wastewater treatment plants which are quite good at capturing them and dealing with them properly, but they are not perfect. So we still have a large volume of microfibers entering the ocean through laundry machines.
The lab collects samples from a wide variety of water sources, municipal wastewater treatment facilities all the way to the Arctic Ocean, both of which have serious microplastic pollution.
Now, I know there was a lot there going on, but pretty much there are fibers that come off our clothes when we wash them. And that can be a problem as well. And there are lots of solutions that are being found for how to reduce the amount of those that get into our water even more than some of our wastewater treatment. But I have a quiz for you. I want to see if you are experts at identifying synthetic fibers, just like Shreyas, our awesome microfiber researcher. So, can you guess if my pictures are microfibers or algae? I'm going to give you 10 seconds to let us know in the chat. You could just use M or A if you'd like. See the first one. Is it synthetic, so made of plastic? Or is it a type of algae? What do we think? They're tiny pieces no matter what. See some guesses for algae, so A. What do we think? I think we have actually some synthetic clothing. So that's actually some nylon from maybe a rain jacket, maybe a t-shirt, something like that. What about this one?
And the last one really tricked them. I don't know if they're going to get this one or not.
It's hard. It is very difficult. I'll give you that.
I think they're all thinking algae again.
Let's see. This one is algae, in fact. It is really hard to tell. One last one.
Are our classes all going to guess algae for every single one of these? Oh, we've got a microfiber.
All right. It can be really hard to tell, but this one is in fact also a microfiber. So this is actually some polyester from something like a fleece jacket, which is a really high shedding material. So really a great way to reduce the amount of fibers that are actually being released is something like washing your clothes in cold water, or even hand washing them. That's less aggressive on the fibers and less are gonna fall out of the clothing. So there's lots that we can cover there. But one of the big challenges is that once these items get into the ocean, it's really hard to pick up a ton of those tiny pieces. It's a lot easier to do it when there's still one large item. So think of that plastic water bottle that we talked about breaking down. Let's explore that a little bit more.
Visit any coastal beach in the ocean and you might find plastic, a lot of plastic. And when you see it lying there, you might wonder where it came from or where it ends up if it's washed back out to sea. Scientists are wondering that too. Turns out plastic in the ocean can travel almost anywhere given enough time, even all the way up to the Arctic. Let's find out how it might get there. The ocean is on constant spin cycle, powered by the sun, the tides, the wind, the Earth's rotation, the surrounding land masses, the continents, and variations in water density. When a piece of plastic finds its way into the ocean, there's a lot of things that could happen. It might get washed back to shore and end up as beach plastic, or an animal like an albatross or a sea turtle might eat it, mistaking it for their natural prey. But what happens if the wind and the currents take it further out to sea? Far away from land, the piece of plastic encounters what's called a gyre. It's a circulating whirlpool created by the Earth's rotation and global wind patterns, found in all 5 major oceans. There's the North Pacific and South Pacific gyres, the North Atlantic and South Atlantic gyres, and the Indian Ocean gyre. At the center of these gyres where this plastic collects are where you get these massive garbage patches that you've probably heard of. 1 square kilometer in these areas can contain over 500,000 pieces of plastic. The plastic might spin for months or years before some water variation or a storm spits it out. Depending on which gyre our plastic finds itself in, it could end up in the Gulf Stream along the east coast of North America, which travels all the way up into the Arctic.
So there's pretty much lots and lots that's going on in the ocean at all the time. There's lots of animals moving around, there's lots of plastic moving around, and that can be really hard for animals to determine what is what. So my question is, if you were an animal and you found these two items, which one would be the food? What do we think? The one on top or the one on bottom?
I have absolutely no idea about this one, so I don't know if our classes are going to have a guess.
I'll give us 5 more seconds to think about it. See some guesses for bottom. So B, the bottom, yeah. You know what? You are correct. The top would be the microfibers, but the bottom is going to be that plankton that's going to be swimming around, with so many animals relying on that for food. So there's lots that we can explore within here, but you know what? I have a question for you. What are some things that you think we could do to help reduce plastic and reduce our impact on water and the ocean? What do you think? I'd love to hear some of your suggestions.
And I would love to see if any of our classes are willing to unmute and give us their answers over the microphone. If you would like to, you can do your little raise hand emoji and we can call on you. But if you're not able to, that's okay. You can pop it in the chat as well.
Well, while we're waiting for some suggestions, you feel free to interrupt me if you want to share over mic. But I will say there are lots of really great ideas. Here are just a few from some youth that we know at OceanWise. Something like doing a YouTube channel talking about nature around you and how to protect it. We have lots of groups that like to lead community cleanups with the OceanWise Shoreline Cleanup Program. Even doing something like a clothing swap to reduce the new clothing items that you need to buy, which means less shedding. So there's lots of different ideas that we can have. Does anybody have any they want to share?
So again, remember, it's ways that you think you can reduce that plastic problem in the ocean. Oh, Fatima, I see that you unmuted. Did you want to give us an answer? Might have been an accident.
I see that some of our friends in Chestermere, Alberta say refuse plastics. Yeah, if you don't need to use that plastic item, maybe it's some single-use plastics, opt out. Some of us have that privilege and opportunity to do that. Oh, Austin O'Brien, only use reusable containers and bags. Yeah, and one of the things that I like to say is don't go buy something new to use. You probably already have bags and containers at home. There's no need to buy something new, just use what you already have. Yeah, and support actions of conservation organizations, definitely. There are so many amazing actions we can have. Sydney's going to talk a bit more about it, and I think we'll have time to explore more of those suggestions and the Q&A time at the end. If we don't have any other suggestions, I think I might hand it over to Sydney, who's got some great ideas. Oh, Fatima, would you like to go?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm talking on the behalf of my students because today they are absent due to exams. So we've been talking these days about about the environment and how to protect the environment, especially from plastic and pollution. They all agreed about the importance of sustainable development and how we all must develop ways to meet our needs so that the future generations can inherit a healthier and greener planet. And they have also prepared some projects that I'm willing to send them to you so you can see what they have done.
That's amazing. Doing research, discussing with others, and even just sharing what you know or what you've learned with others is huge. Just educating others is going to cause a lot of, a big chain reaction in positive actions. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing. And we would love to see what your students are working on. So if you want to send it to us afterwards, we would love to see what they have going. So it sounds like they're really on the right path to ocean conservation over there. Thank you.
Yeah, I will.
All right, so yeah, I guess if we don't have any more questions for this, for sure, if you guys think of something while we have our next presenter, we can revisit it at the end of the presentation. But I am going to pass it over now to Sydney so that she can go ahead and present on behalf of Green Learning.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's awesome to be here, and happy World Water Day. My name's Sydney again, and I'm from an organization called Green Learning. And today I'm going to be talking about some of those solutions that we can implement to address this problem of plastic waste on a really large scale. So for those of you who are brand new to Green Learning, our mission is to engage and inspire students like you to create a better world. And we do that through online education tools, resources, and programs about energy, climate change, and the green economy. Before I jump into things, I do want to just say that I'm tuning in today from just west of Toronto. I'm located in Kitchener-Waterloo, which is the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. I am super grateful to live and work on this land, and I recognize that Indigenous peoples in Canada have been stewards of this land and the waters here for generations, and we really look to them in these times of how we can help to regenerate our natural ecosystem. So a really exciting time, and at least in Canada, the Indigenous peoples here are really leading the way in this respect. So to pick up really where Daphne left off, talking about solutions to plastic waste, and when we're talking about plastic waste in the ocean specifically, the big question that often comes up is, who's responsible for managing that? Who's responsible for making sure that plastic doesn't end up in our ocean in the first place, but who's also responsible for cleaning it up? Because there's obviously lots of plastic that's already there. So I'll give you a couple seconds. If you feel like sharing it in the chat, or even just reflect to yourself, who do you think is responsible for managing this plastic waste?
And that is a very good question. Who is responsible for it? Because we all know that we all see it everywhere. We've spoken about it before. I've never gone to a country that I haven't seen plastic waste. So who is responsible for managing that? That's a great question. What do we think, guys?
Awesome. And if you want to share, feel free. But some of the things that you might be thinking about or even talking about is maybe who's generating this plastic waste. And so looking at a global scale, you can see that most countries are generating at least some level of plastic waste. And here in Canada, while on this map, it looks like we're not generating a lot of plastic waste, we actually generate over 3 million tons of plastic waste every single year. And I'm seeing some awesome comments in the chat about government, industry, people, and we're going to see how it really needs to be a combination and a collective movement to address this problem. And I love those ideas. And so if it's not people who are just generating the waste that's responsible for cleaning it up, you maybe thought about who's mismanaging their waste. So not all plastic waste that's generated ends up in our environment. But some countries have better policies, rules, and regulations in place that mean that the plastic waste that's generated is better contained. So for example, if it goes into an open landfill, that has the chance to blow or flow into our natural environment. And so by containing that, we're better able to manage that plastic waste, but that's not the case across the world. Now, here in Canada, actually less than 1% of our plastic waste ends up in the environment. And you might be thinking, that's pretty good. But in reality, that's still over 30,000 tons of plastic waste every single year that's ending up in our environment. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Canada actually has the largest coastline in the entire world, measuring just about 250,000 kilometers. And so here in Canada, while less than 1% of our plastic waste ends up in the environment, that 30,000 tons still has a lot of opportunity to end up in the ocean. And that's the case with every country in the world. And so when we're looking at plastic waste in this massive resource called the ocean, it really needs to be a collective effort, and we really need to join together in order to manage it. So how do we do this? Do we all divide up and take a piece of the ocean and take responsibility for that? Well, that's not as easy as dividing up, for example, land or a piece of pie. This map here shows territorial versus global high seas, meaning international waters. So for the most part, the land right around or the radius around a country that borders water is responsible for that water. So for example, here in Canada, you can see the dark blue, that pattern all the way around Canada is actually managed by our laws and our policies here in Canada. So if you enter into those waters, you're bound by our laws. All of that light blue that you see is international waters or the global high seas, which means no country, no nation in the world is directly responsible for it. And there aren't very many laws in place there or people to enforce them. And so this is really where ocean management gets really, really tricky. And to really explain how ocean policy is a collective issue, I want to talk about something that we recently went through. 2 years ago, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, there were shortages of resources basically across the world. Here in Canada, we experienced a shortage of toilet paper. Now, it wasn't that there wasn't enough toilet paper to meet everyone's needs. What happened is that everybody acted in self-interest, meaning that they went out and stocked up on as much toilet paper as they could to make sure that they were never going to run out. What that resulted in was that everybody was short on toilet paper and we were experiencing a collective problem. Now, how did we solve this problem? Well, businesses, grocery stores, big box stores put in place policies that limited the number of, for example, toilet paper that people could buy. This meant that people could still meet their needs, but that everyone else still had the opportunity to access that resource as well. That's the power of policy. And we can apply this same idea that grocery stores use to manage toilet paper to our oceans. Now, the ocean is one of our best resources in the entire world. As Daphne mentioned, it helps with climate regulation, cleaning the air. We use it in our economy for transportation, food. So it's a really, really valuable resource that we collectively use. And as we move forward, it's really going to be international policy that helps us manage the ocean. And this is referred to as international ocean governance. And that big kind of term just means laws, policies, regulations in place in order to manage the ocean. And one of the organizations that really helps us manage the ocean and manage the international stage of this is the United Nations. And the United Nations actually has 17 goals that they want to achieve that they believe will transform our world into a more just and sustainable society. As you'll see, number 14 is life below water. And so the ocean is a very important piece of creating a more sustainable future. Now, there are lots of policies and regulations already in place to help manage the ocean and plastics that are entering our waterways. Here in Canada, we have a huge list of policies that together really help us manage and better maintain our ecosystems, including oceans, but also freshwater systems as well. One of those is a ban on single-use plastics. So one thing that we've done as an international community, and Canada is one of these countries, and I'd be interested to hear if you know if the country that you're tuning in from today has a ban on any single-use plastics. But really what we've done is we've decided as an international community that we need to limit the amount of plastic waste that we're generating across the board. And so Canada is one of these countries who has signed this. And as a response, we have a law in place that was just passed in 2021 that says that we're banning some types of single-use plastics, such as straws, plastic cutlery, and even plastic bags. And so these policies are really what's going to drive us forward and make sure that our collective use of the ocean is responsible, and so that we can protect it for generations and years to come. Now, recognizing that I know we want to have time to ask lots of questions, I really want to talk about what can you do? So policy is something that's implemented by governments and international organizations such as the United Nations. But that doesn't mean that you as youth don't have a voice in that. There are massive movements right now led by youth, such as Fridays for Future, that are advocating for these policies at the government level. You can write letters to your MPs or members of parliament or whoever's in your government to tell them that you want these laws, you want your country to sign these agreements and be part of this massive solution that's really what's going to help protect our oceans for the next few generations. Aside from that is that you can spread this word to your family and friends. Once you become of age to vote, you can use your voting power in order to elect governments that are going to put these policies in place. And so as students, as youth, you have a lot of power, and you should absolutely use it to advocate for these policies that are really going to protect our ocean. But with that, I know we want some time to ask some questions, and so I'm going to wrap up there. But thanks so much for learning about how ocean policy can really help drive us forward as we address this problem of not only plastic waste, but biodiversity loss and resource protection. And I hope you all have a really awesome Water Day, and I'm excited to hear what type of questions you have.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was awesome. I do love the idea of like, we all share this one giant ocean, and, you know, we have to work together to make these policies in order to protect it, because yeah, like you can see from those graphs that you showed, some countries are providing a lot more ocean plastic problems than others, but we all share the ocean. So yeah, we do need to definitely make that solution together. So I do see we already have a couple questions coming in. So if you guys do have a question you would like either Sydney or Daphne to touch on, please go ahead and put it into the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can call on you to ask your question. So our first one, we have a question coming over from YouTube. So Daphne, I'm assuming this one is aimed at you since it's for OceanWise, but is OceanWise involved in sea forestation? In Canada, are kelp forests being used to sequester carbon and offset our carbon usage? So if you wanted to speak on that quickly, that would be awesome.
Yes, and the answer is yes. So I'll share my screen one more time. But we at OceanWise are looking for cool ways to really support biodiversity growth as well as mitigating climate change. So we are actually looking into sea forestation as one of those ways to combat climate change. And, you know, one of the big benefits that we get from that is that if we are growing more kelp, so sea forestation is like reforestation. So if we're regrowing forests on land, sea forestation is regrowing kelp and algae in the ocean. And that's rebuilding that entire forest that animals use to survive and thrive. But there's not a lot known yet. So there are some assumptions on how much carbon could be stored or taken out of the ocean if that kelp is then used for processes or even buried in sediment at the bottom of the ocean. We aren't sure exactly how much it helps, but we know it does. And regardless, it does create that wonderful ecosystem, which then builds more biodiversity and more animals, which again hold carbon. So yes, we are exploring, and you can learn more on our website, and we'll be updating that as we learn more as well, and the science continues. So thanks for that.
Awesome, thank you. Our second question here is from Chestermere. So it says, there is so much waste all over the world that is not recycled. Does recycling in Canada really make a difference? It seems overwhelming. So if you guys both wanted to touch on it, I don't know if somebody wanted to go first. Sydney, I think you unmuted, so you can go ahead and take it.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So in Canada, actually only 9% of our plastic waste is recycled, but a lot of it gets recycled in different ways. So for example, we actually break down a lot of our plastic to create energy. Plastics are actually made from oil, crude oil. And so we can actually take that oil and use it for energy. So there are other ways that we can break down and use plastics that aren't considered traditional recycling, but a lot of it does end up in landfills, and it absolutely is overwhelming. And the best way to address that overwhelming amount of plastic waste is just to reduce the amount that we're producing and that we're using to start with. And thinking about when we're creating things that are using plastic. So for example, plastic bottles are an absolute necessity. For example, if you have a natural disaster and need to get fresh water to a location. And so coming up with ways that when we're designing those plastic bottles, that they can then be put back into our economy and used again and again and again is really, really important. But it absolutely is an overwhelming system. And I'm not sure if Daphne, you have other things to add to this, but I know here in Canada, there are a number of different ways that we recycle plastics that aren't necessarily considered just recycling them back into new goods.
Yeah, Sydney, that was a great answer. And I'll just add few things, but one of the things I was going to say is also just making sure that we have recycling as an easy option. I know that, I visited many smaller towns and communities across Canada that they just don't have the infrastructure. They don't have enough people, enough money to really have a big recycling program. So maybe the only one they have is for refundable containers, like those plastic water bottles and cans. Maybe that's something that could be expanded in many areas. But I also know that around a busy city like Vancouver, if we don't have recycling bins easily accessible all the time, people are probably just going to put those recyclables in the garbage too. So there's lots of different things that factor into that as well. And I know another big thing here in Vancouver is also making sure that you are actually putting recyclable things in the recycling bin. It gets really confusing, and I think that's part of what makes it really hard, but doing a little bit of education yourself, exploring your local recycling program's website, seeing what is or isn't recyclable. I know that we have easy cheat sheets that have a lot of those items on there to help you make those decisions.
Yeah, and I wanted to also just add one little thing, kind of based on what Sydney said, that recycling doesn't necessarily have to be recycling, breaking it down, making a new product, but that reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Like plastics are great because they don't break down, so we don't have to be constantly throwing them in the recycle bin. But yeah, finding new ways to use our plastics in different ways before we put them in the recycling bin is also a great option, I think. We have a couple more questions here. So this one's about microplastics. What are the long-term effects? Do we know how microplastics are affecting our ocean biomes? And then how will changes to the ocean affect the other SDGs? So how do those changes in the ocean affect the other sustainable development goals? So either of you guys wanted to take one of those. We only have a few minutes left, so probably our last couple.
I'll quickly address the microplastics one. There's tons of research that's coming out all the time right now that, microplastics is a really hot topic currently. And I would say that there's a lot that we're finding about those microplastics traveling up the food chain, being eaten by those little plankton, that zooplankton, the animal plankton, and then getting eaten by larger and larger animals. That can be a problem in that those plastics can leach chemicals or cause problems if they fill up the stomach of that animal too much. But what we are hoping is that we can find some solutions to break down those microplastics, or, hopefully reduce and not have more join. But I would say it is a problem, but I think that there are still some great solutions out there, and we're constantly finding more. So take a look at some of the cool positive things that we've found in science today.
And I'm happy to answer the question about the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. So because the ocean has such a big impact on, for example, it's the biggest carbon sink in the world, things like number 13, climate action, are directly related. Because by protecting our natural ecosystems, we're ensuring that fish are sustained, and that people who have jobs in these industries, such as fishers, or even people who are on boats who use it for transportation, have decent work. Number 8, responsible consumption and production. So how much of fish are we taking from that ocean? How are we responsibly taking care of it? So really, they are all interconnected and intertwined. And because the ocean is just such an important piece, and plays such an important role in so many aspects of our life, from the food we eat and our own physical health to the air we breathe, you can see how really all of these pieces build together for a sustainable future. And the ocean, being as big as it is and such an important integral part of our life, is right at the center and the core of that. So by supporting the ocean, we really are supporting all of these development goals and pushing everything forward. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, totally. That is such a good answer. It's like the answer is all of them, like all of our SDGs. So my last question for you guys before we wrap things up, I would love to hear from both of you. What would you say is the big take home for our students joining us today? So what's one thing that you really want them to keep in mind leaving this event today?
I would say that plastic and those other challenges that we're seeing, they are challenges, but there's a lot of change that can be done. I know we see some crazy numbers out there, but if we all make changes together, if we try and communicate to others the large scale changes that we want to see, like Sydney was talking about, there's a lot that can be done. We just need to, rally together and share our voices.
Yeah, and I think I have a very similar takeaway is every little bit helps. So even if you think, recycling that one plastic bottle isn't going to make a difference, that it really does, because everything is a drop in the bucket, and eventually that bucket's going to overflow with all those drops, right? So those little changes, whatever they can be, make them. Share what you've learned with everyone you know, so that they can make those little changes, and together all those little changes will make a really, really big difference. So you can make a difference, and that's an exciting thing to know and to hold dear. So every little bit helps.
Awesome. So inspiring. I love it. Every little bit helps. Don't get overwhelmed. We can make a difference. So I just wanted to share this with you guys quickly before I do my final thank yous, because I don't want to forget. But we do have a couple other great events coming up that are secondary events. If this event was something that you guys really enjoyed and loved learning about, you might be interested in these couple coming up as well. So I'll also pop this link in the chat in case my screen doesn't work super well for you, but we do have an event coming up on April 12th on Indigenous perspectives on climate. So we are going to talk with a group, the Indigenous Climate Action, on kind of what we started to touch on a little bit today, kind of what Indigenous groups are doing to protect our climate and what sorts of changes they want to see. And then in May, we have an event coming up on SDGs and art. So if you would like to hear a little bit more about those SDGs, we're going to talk about how you can use art to try to help make a difference. So if you think you might be interested, or your students might be interested in learning a little bit more of either of these, you can go ahead and sign up for these events that are coming up. So I would love to say a huge thank you to both of you ladies. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge. I already learned a lot today, and I'm already interested in the ocean, so I'm sure our kids learned a lot joining as well. So thank you very much for everything that you guys have shared with us. And I look forward to our elementary event.
Thanks so much for having us, and great participation from everyone. So thanks for being awesome this morning or afternoon or evening.
Yep, thank you. Yep.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, everyone. It's great to hear your ideas, and the more you share, the more we're all going to make change. So thanks so much for joining us, everyone. It was great to chat with you on World Water Day.
Thanks. All right. Enjoy the rest of your days or evenings, depending on where you're joining us from, guys. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
And we are off.